Alexandra, thank you so much for talking to us today. Now, I will get going with the questions. Alexandra, was medicine the path you want to take from a very early age?
Yep, literally was. There were I toyed with ideas of doing something like veterinary nursing or physio, but it was always nursing. My mother's a nurse. A lot of my family are medics. I just always wanted to be a nurse.
So it runs in the family then, in the genes. And how many years have you been in the medical profession now? Right. But from very early.
So I started my training in 1989. And I qualified in 92. So it's coming up for a long time.
Long time, amazing. And you've had several senior roles in emergency departments at some major London hospitals. When you look back, which would you say gave you the most job satisfaction and felt the most rewarding?
It's funny, every department is very different. It's a bit like universities, essentially providing the same service, but the character of a hospital is very different from another character. St. Thomas's probably has I'm very fond of it. It was where I did my training. It's where my first job in accident emergency was. And I absolutely loved it. It was a very different time then. We were invariably empty between 2 in the morning and 6, and because there was no one out. And then overnight, our numbers increased exponentially because Westminster Hospital closed and moved down to the King's Road to be Chelsea and Westminster. And soon after that, I left and moved up to St.Mary's Paddington because they were offering the courses for me to progress my career. They were offering to pay for the courses and to give you study leave, whereas St. Thomas's, you had to choose between one or the other. So, and I stayed at St. Mary's for an unbelievable 18 years, which just proves how much I loved St. Mary's. So.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. And comparing your time working in the paediatrics ED to other departments, was this much more emotionally draining, would you say, as you've got to deal with the parents and, their young children and parents worrying and everything?
Again, yes and no. I mean, I think it can be just as draining working in an adult A&E. You've got a frail old lady who's alone. There's nothing more heartbreaking. But I do love children, and I'm sure all my friends will attest to the fact that I'm perfectly childish myself. So that's probably why I gravitate towards the children a lot more, because they're just lovely medicine. They're quite simple medicine. They don't come with any sort of hidden agendas. And they're such a pleasure to work with. So yes, it is quite emotional, but I think, medicine is emotional, and if you stop being emotional, and that's probably why there's been all this burnout during this pandemic, is we really care, we're stretched, but we keep doing it. And the NHS is held together by goodwill and, energy and people just wanting to make a difference. So it is emotionally draining, whatever you do, actually. I think it doesn't matter which department you're in.
No. And can you recall any particular times during your years of being a staff nurse at A&E departments at St. Mary's or St. Thomas's, when there's been a really significant disaster where you've been put under sort of horrendous, pressure and strain?
Again, it's a funny old thing, medicine, is the fact that actually, whilst it may sound awful for you, it's actually what we train to do, and it's what we want to do. So I am very fortunate that I've been on duty for 3 major incidents. So I was on duty for the Paddington train crash, which obviously we were receiving at St. Mary's. The Soho bomb we also received for. By that time, actually, St. Mary's had really become a quite an established trauma centre on the grounds that we'd had 2 major incidents. So when we had the 7th of July bombings, it was, I lack the vocabulary, but it was almost cool because we were good. We had it all set up. We had the lines of control set up, the boxes set up. So as each patient arrived, they were given a box, they were given the members of staff. We work really hard, and we are a good team. And actually, interesting, the more pressure we're under, I think sometimes the better we work, because it doesn't matter who in the team is working, we're all trying to go for the same target, unlike you know, say in the city where the first one to complete the deal is the winner. We don't have that sort of mentality. We all want to be on the winning team.
Yeah, no, of course. And now you've left the hospital environment, and you're an advanced nurse practitioner at a GP surgery.
Yeah.
What made you come to that decision to make that move?
I think one of the key ones was probably shift work. You know, it's a young person's game, and we were doing a lot of nights and a lot of weekends. And whilst my friends and family are incredibly supportive of my extraordinary shift patterns, it does sort of wear you down after a bit.
Take its toll.
And also, you know, you talked about the emotional thing beforehand. I'd stopped enjoying nursing, which was an awful sensation. And I really thought, I'm going to have to change careers. And it was a monumental leap when I walked out of the hospital and just left. But I've found my new job. I'm so happy in it. I'm back to loving nursing. I'm back to loving my patients, my enthusiasm for what I do, everything. It's been fantastic.
Yeah. And so do you think that there's probably, everyone probably has a limited amount of time that they can handle the intensity of an ED department, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. But, you know, we do it because we love it, and when you stop loving it, like anything, you should move on. And it is stressful, it is very emotional. I think it's quite tiring for our families and friends, because I mean, all my friends will attest to, at some point they've had to peel me off the pavement as I'm weeping into a bottle of vodka over something that's happened. But actually, I have to say, I'm so spoiled. My family and friends have always been incredibly understanding when I turn up late for things, or a bit frazzled, or, you know. But life's too short to do something you don't enjoy doing. So if you're not enjoying it, change. I mean, that's the fun of medicine and nursing. There's so many different areas you can go into. It's not just A&E. There's, you know, dermatology. There's, you know, there's all these other areas, which, so it's horses and courses.
Yes, no, of course. And what would you say was the hardest part of your time in emergency? What did you find the most difficult being in those departments?
I think it comes down to frustration. I think most of us at the end of a shift are frustrated at not being able to provide the care that we wanted to because of other constraints or limitations outside of our control. So there isn't the service that we need to refer this patient on to. You know, patients are always so lovely and so grateful and are thanking us, and actually in our hearts we're like, if this was my relative, I wish I should have done more, but I couldn't. I don't have the staffing, I don't have the services. You know, that's what's hardest is, and we've all joked about, I think I'm just going to take them home with me. I think like, I don't know how else I can sort this poor person out and make them feel better.
Hard. It must be hard not to, God. So you've been lead nurse at many major sporting events, including the London Olympics, the Commonwealth Games and the Rugby World Cup. What do you enjoy most about this role, would you say?
I suppose it's the same job, but it's in a different environment. And like working in A&E, the teamwork is such fun. You get to work in sports medicine, particularly, obviously, but you get to work with some really impressive doctors and physios who really know their stuff. They love their sport. You know, when I enjoy sports, but I'm not great at all sports. There are certain sports that I'm fascinated by, but I think it's doing your job, but it's almost doing your, you know, we joke that we get paid to be these roles, you know, so to be lead nurse at Twickenham on match days is such fun. And there's this amazing team on duty, and the energy and the buzz in the room, it's super. And also, you know, we're doing the job we love doing.
Yeah.
So it's super.
Great combination, I guess.
It really is, actually. It's just yes. And the athletes are just, I can't tell you, professional athletes are just the most wonderful bodies to work with. They're so aware of their bodies. They're so fit.
Yeah.
You know, so you really just have to sort out what is the key issue at that point, as opposed to a sort of complication.
Yeah. And do you have any claim to fame of athletes you've treated in the past? Any funny stories you can recall?
Oh goodness me! I think the funniest thing, certainly when we're on duties, you sometimes forget. You know, you're on duties, so you don't think a bit bigger picture. So years and years ago, a very sweet girl came into the department, very pretty black girl, with her black friend, the most enormous security guard. That should have been the alarm, obviously, but I didn't pick up on it. And she was sweet, and she said she'd just come from Wembley at a concert. And I said, oh, that's lovely, you know. Who did you see? She goes, oh, I was singing. And I was like, oh, you were backing singers before? No, I am the singer. You know, you're just like, and the department behind me are all like, oh, dear God, sister. And it was Mary J. Blige, and she was absolutely charming. And I was just like, I'm so sorry, I've never heard of you. I'm singing one of your songs. So there they were singing in my A&E department, and they were sweet, they were smashing, and very unfazed by the stupidity of this A&E nurse.
But I bet
and then last year,
them actually very refreshing for her. Not.
I think it probably was. Last year was my all-time low in sports medicine. We had a young child that came with a nasty facial injury. I saw the father coming towards the medical room, so I sort of slightly blocked him because I didn't want him to see what was happening. And I was like, chatting away, and I was like, Sue, seen any injuries? He was like, yeah, quite a few. And I was like, oh, okay, so you won't be too upset by seeing your son's face? No. I was like, oh, can I have your name? And he said, Zinzan. And I was like, oh, that's lovely. How do I spell that? Zinzan Brooks is one of the most decorated all-black rugby players of my lifetime. Oh my God, he was very good about it. Again, he laughed as he sweetly spelled out his name. I don't think anyone's ever asked Zinzan.
That is brilliant. Oh my goodness. And have you had any sort of difficult, I'm sure you probably have, difficult situations where athletes have tried to convince you that they're okay to continue when they really aren't, and having to convince them that the particular dream, you know, that particular dream has come to an end? Must be very hard.
I think in rugby, obviously, we get head injuries, and that means either they're finished for the game or the tournament. And I think, you know, when the head injury guidelines first came in, there was a lot of resistance to it. They felt that we were going to slow up the game, we were trying to sabotage the game. Actually, as a whole, most people have come on board and realised we're actually genuinely there to improve the game, to make it safer. So I think there have been a few, you know, boys and girls who are a bit distressed by being told that they weren't continuing the match, but that's because they're in a zone, they're very focused. I mean, you as a professional athlete, you know, rider, you would understand that you've done a lot of training to get to this point, and you're very focused on it, and now suddenly somebody's saying
they're not going to give up on it easily. No.
But then, you know, when I was out in the Commonwealth Games, we had a young athlete who 5 days before games started, they decided to pull her, and she was remarkably philosophical about it. She, you know, I think it's very interesting how their mindset works. I would have been gutted and handled it really badly. And she was just like, oh, well, these things happen. And, you know, we're building up for the Olympics. This was just training ground for me because in 2 years' time, which I thought was fascinating.
Well, she's got an extra year now.
Yes, I know. Well, actually, amazingly, we managed to do the thing that needed to be done, and she competed and got a silver medal.
Oh, so, amazing.
Yeah. So when she came back from her event, I was at the main door, and I said, I don't mind saying that the medical team are claiming a thin sliver of that med. And she was like, no, I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh. I expect you've encountered occasions over the years in ED departments and at major sporting events where have you suffered abusive, rude patients and their families? It must be difficult. Have you had to develop a very thick skin for that?
I don't think you ever develop a thick enough skin, but I think certainly when you're younger, you do take it a lot more personally.
Yeah.
It really hurts, you know, and as you get older, you realise they're not yelling at you, Alexandra, they're yelling at the uniform, they're yelling at the system, the frustrations.
Yes.
And I think you get a bit more, you can answer back better rather than taking it terribly personally, or just, you know, I think we're a lot better now at spotting things happening and moving staff, or we have a lot more support
Yeah.
Because it has, over the years, A&E has got rougher and rougher and rougher. And, you know, I have been assaulted several times on duty and come home with, you know, bruisings or, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's very tough on our families. And, you know, I remember the first time I came home to a boyfriend with a black eye, and he was insane with anger. He was like, I just don't understand why you think this is reasonable. And I was like, well, you know, it is what it is, and it's very difficult on the families to get it, because this was a particularly tricky situation, and it was just a poor alignment of my head and this young lad's fist. I don't think he was actually trying to hit me, but you know, it happens.
Yeah. So
it is difficult, but I don't think you get a thick skin. No, I think you just get better at not taking it personally.
Yes. Yeah. And so this coronavirus pandemic has obviously tested NHS workers to the absolute limit. Do you think there are many who will or already have suffered complete burnout, both physically and emotionally, due to this?
I think, yes, I think there will be a fallout. I mean, the NHS is an evolving thing. We change jobs as nurses, change jobs quite regularly. Every 2-3 years, I've changed jobs most of my career.
Yeah.
And I think that's fine. And a lot of doctors move every 6 months when they're going through their training. So it's not difficult to move on and move out. But I think there is going to be some fallout, wrongly or rightly, to prepare for the pandemic. They closed down a lot of outpatient departments and moved those nurses from dermatology outpatients into intensive care. Well, you know, if they wanted to be an intensive care nurse, they would have been one. They chose dermatology for the lifestyle, for their knowledge base, that what, you know, how they enjoy working. So I think that has been very tough on, you know, nurses and doctors who've been pulled out of, you know, and they're perfectly capable. They've had the same training. It's just not their specialty area. And then they've been thrown into a specialty area that's specializing at the time, you know. So I think, yes, it must be really tough on some of them. Very, very tough.
Yeah. And do you think there's been enough support for medics on the front line during this crisis?
Yes and no. I think, you know, the community have been amazing. This, you know, the clapping on the Thursdays and all that stuff has been lovely, and letting us get to the front of a queue at Sainsbury's, or you know, all of that has been really lovely. And that's been, it's nice to get the pat on the back. But I think as carers, I think we're shockingly bad at caring for ourselves and caring for each other. And I think that, I think there hasn't been enough support, and there won't be enough support. And people, you know, people will get through this without having a problem, and other people will really, really struggle with it. And whether they will get the support. I mean, they're saying they're giving all this stuff out. Mental health is one of the most deprived areas of the NHS. It's got the least resources, the least funding. So hopefully all this NHS charities money will go towards mental health. But to be honest, our patients almost need it more than we do, because they are the ones who suffer the most. Yeah.
And have you had to personally deal with a lot of sort of COVID related emergencies with patients?
Well, I'm currently working out in the community, so I think in A&E it would have been very different. We set up a hot clinic. I work for a particularly dynamic group practice that we have got 5 GP surgeries and, you know, 37,000 patients or something. So we're a huge practice. So we closed down one of our surgeries and opened it up as a hot clinic. And the idea was, because we've not seen patients in 14 weeks, everything has been audio or visual, so, you know. So the idea of the hot clinic was, if you were talking to a patient you were concerned about, you could send them up to hot clinic, where somebody in full PPE could assess the patient and make a decision whether they need to be treated at home or an ambulance needs to be called. So yes, I did quite a lot of that. And that was very interesting.
Was that on sort of something like Zoom?
No, literally, we were PPE and we met them in the car park, and we assessed the patient in the car park. It wasn't.
Sorry, but when you did the sort of speaking to them over, is it on a Zoom thing when you're sort of first assessing?
It's I'm very bad at techno. We have one that's set up within us. So there's a camera on our computers, and we can do audio. So you can either telephone them, or you can speak to them on video, or they can send photos of you know, the rash or whatever it is that's bothering them.
And you get them to take their own temperature and then show you the results.
Amazing amount of people have equipment at home, so you know, a lot of people do have blood pressure machines and things at home, which is very helpful.
And
I did a few visits to families. I work in tutoring, and English isn't our first language, and so I did a few visits to families to inform them that relatives were deteriorating in hospital or had already deteriorated, and that was pretty tough, I must say, because you're doing it in full PPE with a translator on your mobile phone, and you're through, you know, and this poor translator saying, "I'm sorry, could you say that again?" You're like, it was that was low. That was hard. And again, you know, we're very tactile as people, so we want to touch people, we want to hug people, we want to comfort them. And I think that was hard. That was a lot harder than anything I think I've ever done, is giving news like that, but not doing it how I wanted to do it.
Oh dear, it must have been very tough. And do you think there'll be an effect on the number of frontline medical professionals after this? You know, do you think there'll be a drop in the numbers or an increase in the numbers once this?
Well, I think, as we said before, we're quite a fluid bunch. I mean, you may have found some of these dermatology nurses discover they actually like intensive care, so we might have recruited some. But you know, people will need to take time out, and you know, we can take sabbaticals in the NHS, so you know, people do understand we can do it. You know, we're massively short-staffed, so there's always agency nurses out there who cover the shortfalls, but I think there will be a movement. I think there's a lot afoot at the moment with the NHS. They're changing a lot of things, and they're moving a lot of things around, so I think there is going to be, over the next year, quite a seismic change in practices. No,
I'm sure. And what would you say would be the best advice you could give to a young person who wants to embark on a career in medicine or nursing? I think
if they want to do it, do it. It is hard work, but then I think going into the city would have been incredibly hard work. You know, we were talking to friends last night and saying, you know, in our 20s, and she says, I regularly worked, you know, from Thursday morning through to Tuesday morning without stopping. And I was like, God, you know, you should get unionized. At least we don't have to do that. But, you know, my pay is a third of hers. So, you know, I think the fun thing of medicine and nursing is there are so many different areas in it, from sports medicine, A&E, you know, dermatology, working in the community. There's, you know, there are jobs for everybody, and it is such fun. You know, the teams you get to work with are wonderful, and we do have a lot of fun. You know, it's not all hard work.
What would you say you most enjoy about your job now compared to you know, being in A&E departments and nursing?
I think actually I fell out of love with nursing because I wasn't being able to give my patients the time, and I missed the connection with my patients. And I think the fun thing about being in GP land, you know, my friends who work with me in A&E will die when they hear this, because they just can't believe an A&E nurse could work in this. But actually, it's been really lovely getting to know families, getting to, you know, girls coming in saying, I think I might be pregnant, and then 9 months later they have a baby, and then, you know, 8 weeks later they, you know, they come in for vaccination. So you've done a journey with them. And I love that. And we've had some highs and lows, and, you know, you do start to know the name of their grandmother and their dog, and, you know, and you've built up this lovely relationship. So I do really enjoy that. I love
I bet that's lovely, really lovely. So Alexandra, what do you do when you're relaxing? Doesn't sound like you relax very often, but when you do relax, what do you like to do?
I have a small addiction to ballet. So I worship the Royal Ballet. So I go along with my great friend to watch the Royal Ballet probably once or twice a week.
Lovely. Well,
you know, each dancer dances something differently, and so watching Swan Lake 7 times in the season, everyone's like, how possibly can you do that? Well, that was 7 different casts. It's 7 very different ballets. And I think they're the most extraordinary beauty. And it's like going sort of yoga or something. You just sort of, you zone out and go into this happy place with happy music and incredible athletes. I mean, they're just beautiful.
Yeah, no, they are. And where would what would your ideal holiday be, would you say?
I think it's funny, during the lockdown, you sort of start dreaming of Mauritius and you know, things like that, and somewhere that's sort of sun and sea. But I have to say, I've missed my family so incredibly. I think that's been the toughest part. So I have one sister in near Oxfordshire, and I saw them the last weekend before lockdown, and I only saw them last weekend. So that has been really tough. And my other sister is out in Georgia. She's based in Tbilisi. So I think if my ideal holiday is not going to be Mauritius, it's actually for all of us to be together, whether it's by Cornwall Sea or whether it's in Mauritius. But it's just to be together, all the siblings together, all the nibblings to be together. It would be just heaven.
Yeah, how lovely, how lovely. And finally, if you could ask anyone in the world to dinner, who would be your 2 dream people to ask? I know it's a bit of a
the most obvious answer to that's going to be George Clooney and Brad Pitt, isn't it? Because of our generation. But actually, do you know what? We've had a lot of fun over the last few weeks is watching the Andrew Lloyd Webber The Show Must Go On. So I think I'd like him to come along with his piano on my family holiday. Yeah. And then we could sing musicals all the time. It'd be heaven. Oh,
that's great.
I think it'd be his hell, but because I can't hit a single note. I've got lots of volume, but no music. But I put lots of enthusiasm into it. So I think it would probably be Andrew Lloyd Webber, and his wife's absolutely delightful. So I'm sure she can come too. That had to be 2.
I'd love to.
I suppose the other one of my biggest heroes is Steve Redgrave. So this week is meant to be Henley Regatta, which for our family is a sort of devout week of celebration of sport. So I think I'd probably have to ask Steve Redgrave because we all love him.
Yeah,
he's
brilliant.
Our greatest sporting hero.
Oh well, I hope you get to all be with all the family somewhere this summer.
Yes.
Somewhere by the sea or in Scotland.
It'll probably be Scotland by the river, but it'll be
lovely. That'd be lovely. Thank you so much, Alexandra. That was
no problem at all.
Really interesting, and just loved hearing all about that. It's fascinating.
Thank you.